making Orono great again. Tell your neighbors, tell all your friends. It's the answers you need to know. It's the Wyatt Sharp Show.
Hello everyone and welcome to the podcast. Today I'm joined by the Ontario Minister of Transportation and Francophone Affairs, Caroline Mulroney. Hello Caroline, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Hi Wyatt, it's my pleasure to be here with you today.
So my first question for you today is why did you get involved in politics? I know you come from a political family, but why did you want to get involved in politics?
Well, I saw something that was happening that I wanted to change. I wanted to get involved and be part of a party that was going to bring change to Ontario. And that's sort of the real impetus. But as a career, it was something that I was always interested in. I think sometime in high school that I started thinking about it as a career for myself. I obviously lived in Ottawa. My dad was Prime Minister of Canada. And so most of the people that I interacted with were people who had chosen politics as their profession. And I found them all to be inspirational. And so I thought that one day that was something that I wanted to do. And then the opportunity presented itself. The impetus was there in terms of the issues that I wanted to fight for. And so I decided to run.
For sure. Okay, so my first question for you today, aside from the kind of opening question, is on the topic of public transit. So many people are scared to take public transit because of COVID, and they're worried about COVID potentially spreading on public transit. So what is your ministry, the Ministry of Transportation, doing to ensure that public transit is safe for Ontarians to ride, and then making sure that Ontarians know that it is safe to ride?
Well, that's one of the biggest issues that we deal with at the Ministry of Transportation. We started dealing with it early on in the pandemic. We issued a stay-at-home order, and so people had to stay home. Ridership went down, but transit stayed open to get our essential frontline workers to work and home. So we had to find a way to address people's confidence in public transit. So what we did is my ministry, the Ministry of Transportation, worked with Dr. Barbara Yaffe, who works with Dr. Williams. She's the Associate Chief Medical Officer of Health. And we developed guidelines for transit agencies, things that they needed to do to make sure that transit was safe. And so it was a series of health and safety protocols. And those guidelines were then used by transit agencies across the province, and including by Metrolinx. So Metrolinx is the agency that the province runs. And I had the chance to go down to Union Station and look at what those protocols and actually what it meant for people. So on some of Metrolinx's buses, rows of seats were removed to allow for physical distancing. Plexiglass barriers were installed in between the chairs to keep people from spreading the virus. Hand sanitizer dispensers were put on some of the buses and then in the stations. And at a few places like Union Station, they even have tables set up where you can learn a little bit more about what we're doing to keep public transit safe, and get your temperature checked and things like that. So we took this was a priority for us since the beginning, and we implemented it as quickly as we could, and we're helping transit agencies do the same. So as restrictions lift, people should know that we've taken all the precautions that we can, that we need to make sure that public transit is safe for people to ride once the restrictions are lifted.
For sure, and this isn't necessarily related to your ministry portfolio. It's kind of more, I would say, in the Ministry of Education, but it is still a form of transportation. So let's say school buses. On school buses, people can be concerned that the same case scenario on public transit, but that there's not enough physical distancing on school buses. So what's the solution to ensuring that kids, when they're on school buses, can maintain physical distancing and stay safe on school buses?
So school buses are developing their own protocol, and we're working with the Ministry of Education. You're right, they run the school buses to make sure that protocols are in place. You know, a lot of it, I know, just like when you're in school, you've got to follow, as a student, you have to follow those protocols. So you've got to be good when you're on the buses and make sure that you're respecting physical distancing, wearing your mask, sanitizing your hands. So we're working with the Ministry of Education to make sure those protocols are in place on school buses as well.
Okay, so my next question is, a lot of Francophone Ontarians come from Northern Ontario, generally in areas that have poor internet connection or less access to the proper technology. So how is the government providing support for Francophone Ontarians during the pandemic and ensuring that they have the resources that they need?
Well, as Minister of Francophone Affairs, I'm focused on making sure that Francophone communities get the support that they need. So many of the services that Francophones rely on that actually help strengthen communities come through nonprofit organizations that operate in small communities across the province, but as you said, especially in Northern Ontario. So we developed a COVID response fund just for nonprofit organizations, to give them grants to support them through this difficult time so that they don't have to close their doors, so that they'll be there for Francophones. So that was, it's an emergency fund, but we just topped it up. It was $2 million. We've just added another $1 million to that emergency fund because we believe that it's essential for those small organizations. But you know, there's a lot more that we're doing for Francophones. You know, we're building new schools. We are providing support on the labor side to make sure people can get jobs. But you did mention connectivity. We are also supporting the expansion of broadband across the province for Francophones and also non-Francophones, because we know how important that is.
For sure. Okay, so my next question for you today is, the Ontario budget has $3.7 million, and I read that in, I believe, Global News. And that's to ensure that seniors can get to the mass vaccination sites. But is this enough funding for this very important issue, seeing how big some areas of the Ontario budget received funding for, how big the funding was for some issues? Is this enough funding for this issue?
That's a good question. The issue itself is an important one because you know, we are going in we've identified vulnerable populations and priority populations to get the vaccine first. And what we saw is that although vaccination rates are high among the people who are 80 plus, and as we're going down 75 plus, there may be some elderly people who will have trouble getting to the vaccination sites. So that's why we've approved the funding and the supports to get people to the vaccination clinics. But you know, we do all the work at the Ministry of Health to determine whether or not the funding that we have put together is enough to support them. If it's not, I'm sure that we will go back to make sure that we are providing enough. Premier Ford has said that no expense will be spared to support Ontarians through this really difficult time, and especially for our elderly and most vulnerable populations. So right now, we just announced it and we're putting it into gear. And so once the program gets off the ground, we'll see if it's enough. But if people who are listening to your show are having trouble getting to their vaccination clinics, they should definitely call. Well, if they live in David Piccini's riding, call David Piccini, or they can always reach out to my office.
For sure. So I know you mentioned that this, obviously the budget was just released last week, but is there any idea on when this will begin?
It should be beginning immediately. I haven't followed up on that, but it came through. We worked really quickly on that. So what we noticed was that we were opening up vaccinations to people 80 and above, and we weren't able to get all of the 80-year-olds to the max vaccination clinics. So Christine Elliott, the Minister of Health, put together a proposal for funding in a program that would support getting those people to vaccination clinics. So we just put that into place last Thursday. And so I'm sure the money's been approved. And so it's just about getting it off the ground. And I haven't heard anything about it, but I would expect that they would get working on it immediately because it was urgently required.
Okay. So we're going to move to the talking about COVID, and in addition to your role as minister, you're also an MPP. So in many parts of the province, they're focusing on vaccinating senior citizens. In most area, I believe it's over 80, but I believe they said that now they're going to start vaccinating people over 70 in some regions. So what's the scenario looking like in your riding, and which demographic are they focused on vaccinating?
So I have two public health units in my riding, and though the determination of the ages, the province will set it, make recommendations, but the public health units will put it into place. And so some public health units are different. And in my riding, we're now moving down to the 75s and up in both of my public health units. And we have a mass vaccination clinic in Newmarket, and we have a few others across the riding. So far, the rollout has been going well. We want to just make sure that people are getting the information. It sort of goes back to your earlier point about getting people to the mass vaccination clinics, but also making sure that they know about it and about the changes in the guidelines. And so, but so far it's been going well. How's it been going in your area?
It's good. So my great grandma who lives in Newcastle, she's 87. She got it a few weeks ago, and then my papa who lives in Newmarket, so in Christine Elliott's riding, who's I believe 70, just got it the other day, I think. So that was good as well.
That's great.
Yeah. So my next question to you today is still on the local level and in regards to your role as an MPP. So small businesses have been impacted by COVID as well, perhaps one of the biggest industries impacted by COVID. So how are you helping the small businesses of your riding in your role as the MPP?
Well, the public health measures that have required businesses to close has been one of the very difficult byproducts of this crisis. And so our government has put forward a series of supports that are designed to help small and medium-sized businesses navigate this difficult time, help them with funding, provide them funding for whatever their expenses are, funding for PPE, rebates on energy, rebates, all sorts of different kinds of supports to help them. And my job as an MPP is to make sure that the businesses in my riding are aware of those programs. So what I do is I do roundtables, a lot of roundtables with the different business groups like the Chambers of Commerce. So I have 3 municipalities in my riding, and I do roundtables with those 3 Chambers of Commerce. And then we do outreach through social media and other forms of outreach, calling, having meetings and so on, to make sure that people know that the programs are there, and then helping them apply. What we found in one of my municipalities is that people who applied often applied for 4 or 5 different government support programs. But then there's a group of people who don't know about it. So I'm trying to get the word out and make sure people know that the supports are there, because it will really help them through this difficult time.
Okay, and so as the final question today, the NDP and Liberals are calling for paid sick days. Based on the situation in your riding, do you really believe that paid sick day measures are needed? And obviously your answer is likely going to be no, because the PC government doesn't feel that way because of some of the programs that have already been implemented at the federal level. But based on the situation in your riding, do you believe that additional paid sick day measures are needed?
Well, the federal government provides, as you rightly pointed out, with paid sick days, 20 paid sick days. And so we believe that is a good number. The NDP and Liberals want us to implement 14. So we know that the federal government has provided a generous program for sick days, which we think is important. And we just don't think the government should duplicate the work that they do. And so since the funding is there and the program is there, we encourage people to use that program. But we absolutely do support workers, especially when they need to go to mass vaccination clinics or if they need to take time off work because they're sick.
For sure. All right. Well, that was my final question for you today. So again, thank you very much, Caroline.
Thank you very much, Wyatt. It was great to meet you.
You as well.